Welcome to CSS Breakdown, book by book, season '07, episode 17, where we open Atkinson and Hilgard's Introduction to Psychology 15th edition by confronting the unsettling question: what makes ordinary people commit truly inexplicable acts, and how do situations silently shape our every decision? Today, we're embarking on a really fascinating deep dive into the world of social psychology. We'll be exploring how powerful situations, maybe more than just our individual personalities, can profoundly influence how we behave.
It's a huge question, isn't it? And it
Mm.
gets right to the core of, well, understanding ourselves and everyone around us. When you look at these terrible events like the Nazi regime or Jonestown or the 9/11 hijackings, our first reaction often is to label the people involved as just evil or maybe crazy. And, well, that's kind of comforting in a way. It puts distance between them and us.
Right, it makes it feel like something we wouldn't do.
Exactly. But social psychology offers this completely different perspective. It moves beyond just looking at, individual character flaws. And this brings us straight to a concept that's, well, fundamental in social psychology, the fundamental attribution error.
Okay, what's that?
It's our tendency, and it's super common, to overestimate how much someone's personality or character influences their actions. And crucially, we underestimate the impact of the situation, the circumstances around them, especially when explaining other people's behavior.
So we blame the person, not the context.
Pretty much. And it's not just for, horrific events. We do this constantly. Judging someone for being rude, maybe, without thinking maybe they just got some terrible news. It's a mistake we all make.
So our mission today, then, is to kind of pull back the curtain on these, well, almost invisible forces. We want to uncover how situations really shape our choices, probably way more than our intuition tells us. Get ready for some, maybe some aha moments that might change how you see behavior, including your own. Let's start unpacking this. First up, the most basic social situation. What happens just by having other people nearby?
Yeah, this goes way back. 1898, Norman Triplett. He was a psychologist. And you know something interesting about bicycle racers?
Okay.
They seemed to go faster when they were racing directly against other cyclists compared to just racing against the clock. Simple observation.
Ah.
So he took it into the lab, did some early experiments, had kids reeling fishing lines, found many worked faster when another kid was doing the same thing next to them. He called it coaction.
Wow, such a simple start for like a whole field. And you see this social facilitation now,
Yeah.
right? Like ants digging more in groups or...
Exactly. Animals eating more when others are there, college students solving multiplication problems faster with someone beside them. It's everywhere. And it's not just coaction doing the task together. Even just having a passive spectator, an audience, can boost performance. We call those audience effects. Both fall under social facilitation. But here's where it gets interesting, maybe a bit counterintuitive. Psychologists pretty quickly found the opposite effect, too. Social inhibition.
Inhibition, so it makes you worse.
Sometimes, yeah. People actually made more errors on those multiplication problems when others were present, even if they went faster sometimes. Often, both speed and accuracy dropped.
Okay, that's weird. Help and hurt. So how do we know which one it's going to be? Is there a pattern?
There is, yeah. The core finding across tons of studies is pretty clear. The presence of others, co-actors, or an audience, it helps on simple or really well-learned tasks.
Got it. Like shooting free throws if you're a pro.
Exactly. But it hurts performance on complex or poorly learned tasks, like learning a difficult new dance move or memorizing a complex list for the first time. You'll probably do worse with people watching. They even tested cockroaches escaping light, easy path, faster with other roaches, complicated maze, slower.
Cockroaches. Okay. So why does this happen? Is it just nerves?
Well, one idea, Zhejiang's drive theory, suggests others just amp us up. General arousal. If the task is easy, that extra energy helps your dominant, likely correct response.
Okay.
But if it's complex, the dominant response might be wrong, so the extra energy just makes you mess up more. Another view, gaining traction, focuses on attention. Others are distracting, cause overload, narrow your focus.
And that attention idea got some strong support, right, with the Stroop task.
Yeah, exactly. The Stroop task, naming the ink color of a word when the word itself is a different color name. It's complex, not well learned.
Right, like OAD written in yellow ink.
Yeah,
It's tricky.
totally. If the dominant response idea was the whole story, others should make you worse at Stroop. But people actually perform better.
Better? How?
Because that narrowed attention helps them ignore the irrelevant word itself and just focus on the ink color. It cuts through the interference. It really shows how nuanced this is. Because, just having someone there isn't always enough. There are limits.
Like what?
Well, the other person usually needs to be actually observing or competing. If they're just reading or blindfolded, the effect often disappears, and competition matters. If the other person is no challenge, it doesn't boost you as much.
It really brings it back to the situation, doesn't it? Your performance isn't just your skill. It's shaped by who's around and what they're doing, like public speaking or taking a test. That pressure, how you do, it's all social.
Okay, so just having people around changes things. But what about when it's not just a few people, but a crowd? When you feel anonymous,
Yeah.
that leads to something called deindividuation, right?
Exactly. Gustave Le Bon wrote about this way back in 1895. He saw how crowds could lead to, well, aggressive, even immoral behavior spreading like a contagion. Like, individual responsibility just melts away.
Scary thought? Yeah. And that idea is central to de-individuation. Certain group situations, they minimize your personal identity, reduce your sense of public accountability, and that can lead to behavior people wouldn't normally do. Think masked rioters causing more damage. Early theories figured it just weakened restraints because you felt anonymous.
And Zimbardo's study really highlighted this.
Oh, definitely. The 1969 shock study. College women, some anonymous in hoods and coats, gave twice the shock level compared to women who are identifiable. In another study, kids trick-or-treating anonymously stole more candy.
Seems straightforward. Anonymity equals aggression?
Yeah.
But was it really that simple?
Great question.
Huh?
It turned out to be more complex. Johnson and Downing did a study in '79. Similar shock setup, but participants wore either KKK-style outfits, nurses' uniforms, or their own clothes.
Okay, what happened?
KKK costumes slightly increased shocks, as you might expect, but the nurses, they gave fewer shocks than the control group.
Fewer. Wow. So anonymity doesn't automatically mean bad behavior.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It showed anonymity isn't the whole story. This led to a big rethink. The revised view is that situations reducing public accountability like big groups, anonymity, they don't just erase personal identity. They actually enhance group identity.
Enhance it. How?
So wearing a nurse uniform makes the nurse identity stronger and you conform to its norms, helping, caring. A KKK costume makes that group identity salient with its aggressive norms. It's about conforming to the norms of whatever group identity feels strongest in that situation.
That makes so much sense. It depends on the kind of group you feel part of. Think about being at a peaceful vigil versus a rowdy protest. The situation pulls for different behaviors, even if you're anonymous in both. Let's shift to another really chilling effect. Why people don't help sometimes, even in emergencies. The Kitty Genovese murder in '64 is the classic tragic example, isn't it?
It really is. The story goes, 38 witnesses supposedly did nothing while she was attacked. While the 38 witnesses number is debated now, it absolutely sparked research into the bystander effect. Basically, you're less likely to get help when more people are present, which is totally counterintuitive. You'd think more people is more help,
Yeah.
but study after study shows the opposite.
Why on earth would that happen?
Latani and Darley figured out two main psychological factors. First, pluralistic ignorance.
Pluralistic ignorance.
Yeah. Emergencies are often ambiguous. Is that guy stumbling drunk or having a heart attack? Is that smoke or steam? We hesitate, look around, try to act cool, see how others react.
Okay, makes sense.
But everyone else is doing the same thing, looking calm, checking others. So, because nobody is acting alarmed, everyone wrongly concludes it must not be an emergency. It's a massive misinterpretation loop.
Wow. So inaction breeds inaction.
Precisely. In one study, smoke filling a room. 75% report it when alone. Less than 13% in groups of 3. Another, a woman falls. 70% helped alone, only 40% in pairs. In that awful James Bolger case in the UK, adults saw this toddler being mistreated but assumed the older boys were his brothers, defined a horrific situation as a family issue.
God, that's disturbing. What's the second factor?
Diffusion of responsibility.
Yeah.
This kicks in even when the emergency is clear. If you're the only witness, the responsibility to act is squarely on you. But if there are 10 other people...
You think someone else will do it.
Exactly. Someone else must have called 911. Someone else is more qualified. The burden gets spread so thin, no one feels personally responsible enough to step up. In a classic experiment, participants heard someone apparently having a seizure over an intercom. If they thought they were the only one listening, 85% went for help. If they thought 5 others were listening, only 31%. And these people weren't callous. They were visibly upset, stressed. The situation diffused their sense of responsibility.
It ties back to deindividuation again, feeling less accountable in a group.
It does, even in imagined group.
So this is pretty bleak. Is there any good news? What happens if you minimize that ambiguity and diffusion?
Yes. There's hope. A great study on the New York subway. A researcher pretended to collapse. Sometimes he used a cane, unambiguous need. Sometimes he smelled of alcohol, more ambiguous. The cane victim got spontaneous help 95% of the time. Didn't matter how many bystanders. The drunk victim, less often. When the need is clear and people are face-to-face, help increases dramatically. Also, seeing other people helping models, is huge. See someone stop for a flat tire, you're more likely to stop later. See friends donate to charity, you might too. Even TV role models can have an effect.
Okay, that's encouraging.
And here's the really empowering bit for you listening. Just learning about these effects makes a difference. Students at the University of Montana who had a lecture on bystander effects were significantly more likely to help in a staged emergency later compared to those who didn't get the lecture.
Wow, so knowledge is power here. Just being aware can help you overcome these situational traps. Okay, let's move from the subtle presence of others to more active social pressure. Compliance and obedience. Okay, imagine this. You are absolutely 100% sure you're right about something simple, like which line is longer on a card. But everyone else in the room confidently says the wrong answer, unanimously.
Yeah.
Do you stick to your guns, or do you go along with the group?
It's a tough scenario to imagine, isn't it? Most of us think, oh, I definitely say what I see. We believe in our own autonomy.
Right. That fundamental attribution error, again, may be applied to ourselves. We underestimate the situation's pull.
Exactly. Solomon Asch's classic experiments in the 1950s really put this belief to the test.
What did he do?
He brought participants into a group, supposedly for a visual perception task, judging line lengths. Easy stuff, obvious answers. But everyone else in the group was secretly working for Asch Confederates.
Ah, the setup.
Yep. On certain trials, all the Confederates gave the same, clearly wrong answer. The real participant answered last or near last.
And the results? Did people conform?
Strikingly often. The average participant conformed to the wrong majority about a third of the time. And get this, 75% conformed at least once. A group of just 3 or 4 Confederates was enough to create maximum pressure.
Wow, a third of the time. Were they actually convinced they were wrong?
Mostly. No, it wasn't usually about changing their private belief. It was about the intense discomfort of disagreeing publicly. Fear of looking foolish, incompetent, or maybe insulting the group. It's a powerful social norm not to rock the boat, especially on something seemingly simple. So it was mostly public conformity or compliance, going along to get along.
So what made the biggest difference in whether people conformed?
Unanimity. Absolutely crucial. If just one other person in the group, even one Confederate, gave the correct answer, conformity dropped massively, from like 32% down to 6%.
Just one ally.
Just one. Even if that ally was also wrong, but different from the majority, or wore thick glasses and complained they couldn't see well, having just one other person break the unanimity frees you up to voice your own dissent. You don't feel so alone. And even subtle things matter. Researchers found they could prime people to conform more just by showing them words like adhere or comply beforehand. Or a picture of Norman the accountant.
Seriously, an accountant picture.
Yep. And conversely, words like challenge or a picture of Norman the punk rocker made them conform less. These cues nudge our behavior without us even realizing it. We should probably distinguish 2 types of influence here. Informational social influence. That's conforming because you think others have better information. Like figuring out which fork to use at a fancy dinner by watching others.
Okay, learning from the group.
Right. Then there's normative social influence. Conforming to fit in, be liked, avoid rejection, like dressing a certain way at a new school. Asch's study, mostly normative influence. People didn't want to stand out. And interestingly, this normative pressure tends to lessen a bit with age. And remember pluralistic ignorance. It can happen in conformity too. We might conform to what we think is the norm, even if nobody privately agrees. Like students not asking questions in a confusing lecture because they assume everyone else gets it.
Ah, the silent majority phenomenon.
Exactly. Princeton actually used this insight to reduce binge drinking. They showed student survey data revealing that most students actually felt uncomfortable with the campus drinking culture, despite the public appearance. Correcting that misperceived norm reduced conformity to it.
So again, awareness helps. Knowing these pressures exist, even the subtle ones, gives you a fighting chance to resist if you want to. But, okay, if majorities are so strong, how does anything ever change? How do minorities, people with unpopular ideas, ever get heard or influence others?
That's a great question. And it's where European social psychologists really focus their attention, looking at minority influence.
So can minorities sway majorities?
They can. Research shows that a consistent minority, say, two Confederates in an Ash-like study arguing against four real participants can indeed influence the majority. But they have to be consistent over time and appear confident, but not rigid or arrogant. The key difference, though, is the type of influence. Minorities often produce less public conformity, but more private attitude change. Real internalization. It might take longer, happen after a delay.
Why would that be?
Several ideas. Minorities might make the majority stop and think more deeply about the issue. Or maybe there's an implicit leniency contract. The majority listens politely out of fairness, and that opens the door to persuasion. Plus, seeing a minority bravely stand up for their beliefs can be inspiring and attract converts.
So majorities get compliance through social pressure. But minorities, if they're credible and persistent, can actually change hearts and minds, drive real innovation.
That seems to be the pattern. Minorities can be engines of change.
Okay, let's circle back to where we started, those deeply unsettling events. Nazi Germany, My Lai. We asked if it was just evil people.
Right, and Hannah Arendt's observations of Adolf Eichmann's trial were so influential here. She saw him not as a monster, but as a rather ordinary bureaucrat. Diligently following orders, organizing deportations, she coined that chilling phrase, the banality of evil.
The idea that ordinary people can do horrific things under certain circumstances.
Exactly. Her conclusion was controversial, and historians debate her portrayal, arguing Eichmann maybe wasn't quite so banal. And newer work emphasizes how identity and situation interact. But the core question remains, how do situations enable ordinary people to commit atrocities?
And this leads us directly to Stanley Milgram's experiments, probably the most famous and arguably most disturbing demonstration of situational power.
Absolutely. In the early 1960s, Milgram set out to understand obedience to authority. He recruited ordinary men, and later women, for what they were told was a study on memory and learning at Yale University.
What was the actual setup?
Participants drew lots to be the teacher or learner. But it was rigged. The real participant was always the teacher. The learner, an actor, a Confederate, was strapped into a chair in another room. The teacher's job: read word pairs, test the learner's memory, and deliver an electric shock for every wrong answer, increasing the voltage each time.
And the shock machine?
It looked imposing. Switches from 15 volts up to 450 volts. Labels like slight shock, moderate shock, all the way to danger, severe shock, and finally, XX at the end.
Oh, wow. Did the learner react?
Oh, yes. It was all pre-scripted, played from a tape recorder, grunts at lower levels, then shouts of pain, demands to be let out, complaints about a heart condition, agonized screams, pounding on the wall. And then, after 330 volts, just silence. Eerie silence.
And if the teacher hesitated?
A stern experimenter in a lab coat was right there, using a sequence of prods. Please continue, or the experiment requires that you continue. It is absolutely essential that you continue. You have no other choice. You must go on. Calm, authoritative.
What did people think would happen? Like when Milgram described this to psychiatrists?
They predicted almost total disobedience. They figured maybe 1%, the pathological fringe, might go all the way to 450 volts. Most expected people would stop around 150 volts when the learner first demanded to be released. College students today usually predict they'd stop early too.
And the reality?
Shocking. In the main version, 65%, nearly two-thirds of ordinary people, went all the way to 450 volts. Past the danger, severe shock, past the silence. Nobody stopped before 300 volts when the learner started pounding the wall.
65%. That's staggering.
It completely overturned assumptions about character versus situation. People weren't enjoying it. They showed extreme stress sweating, trembling, nervous laughter, biting their lips. They argued with the experimenter, but they continued. It's that fundamental attribution error. Again, we assume intentions drive behavior, but the situation was just incredibly powerful.
So how can we be sure it was the situation, not just that Milgram happened to recruit unusually obedient or cruel people?
Because Milgram ran numerous variations, systematically changing parts of the situation, and obedience levels changed dramatically. This isolates the situational factors. There were 4 key ones.
Okay, what were they?
First, surveillance by the authority figure. When the experimenter left the room and gave orders by phone, obedience dropped from 65% to just 21%. People started cheating, pretending to give shocks. His physical presence mattered hugely.
Interesting. What else?
Second, buffers, or psychological distance from the victim. In the standard setup, the learner was in another room. Bring the learner into the same room. Obedience dropped to 40%. Make the teacher physically force the learner's hand onto a shock plate, down to 30%.
Closer contact makes it harder.
Absolutely. And the reverse. Increase the distance. No verbal feedback at all from the learner. Obedience went up to 100%. Also, the link in the chain effect. If your job was just pulling a switch that enabled someone else to deliver the shock, 93% obeyed. Even the machine itself acts as a buffer. Easier to flip a switch than inflict direct harm.
Okay, surveillance, buffers. What's third?
Third, role models. This shows conformity working the other way. If two other teachers, Confederates, refused to continue at 150 or 210 volts, obedience plummeted to just 10%.
Wow. Seeing others disobey makes a huge difference.
Massive. And if two experimenters argued with each other about whether to stop, obedience dropped to 0. Not one participant continued. So it wasn't just a choice between obeying authority and being autonomous. It was often a choice between obeying authority and conforming to the disobedience of others. The situation got redefined.
Fascinating.
And the last factor, fourth, the emerging nature of the situation. It didn't start with shock this guy at 450 volts. It started innocuously, a memory study, a tiny 15-volt shock. Then it escalated, step by tiny 15-volt step. There was no natural point to say, okay, now it's wrong. Each step made the next easier, and quitting meant admitting the previous steps were also wrong.
The slippery slope.
Exactly. Participants were caught up, little time to reflect. Torn between the authority, keep going, and the victim, let me out.
Mm-hmm.
In that confusion, the authority's definition usually won. Most disobedience, when it happened, was at 150 volts, the first explicit plea from the learner. And we can't forget ideological justification, the belief system that makes the authority seem legitimate. For Milgram's participants, it was advancing science. For Nazis, serving the state. For Jonestown, the cause. This ideology helps people see harmful actions as necessary or even noble.
Milgram's studies are so powerful, but they obviously raise huge ethical questions, the stress on participants.
They absolutely did. People were clearly distressed. Critics worried about lasting harm, feeling used or ashamed. Milgram argued he took precautions. Extensive debriefing immediately after, revealing the hoax, friendly reconciliation with the learner, follow-up questionnaire showing most, 84%, were glad they participated, and psychological evaluations finding no evidence of long-term harm.
Still, would they be allowed today?
Probably not in their exact form. Ethical guidelines are much stricter now regarding deception and potential distress. The balance has shifted. But, and this is crucial, Jerry Berger did a partial replication more recently, stopping participants at 150 volts, the point of first protest. He found similar obedience rates to Milgram's original studies at that point. Situational pressures are still potent, though, sobering note, peer role models who dissented had almost no effect in Berger's study, unlike Milgram's.
Wow. Still relevant.
And think about everyday obedience. Hoffling's study in 1966, nurses on a real hospital ward. An unfamiliar doctor phones in an order for an obviously excessive dose of an unauthorized drug. 21 out of 22 nurses started to administer it before being stopped. They violated multiple hospital rules. And again, other nurses predicted they wouldn't obey. That fundamental attribution error keeps popping up.
Okay, so we've seen compliance and obedience. Let's switch gears to internalization. When we don't just do something, but actually change our private attitudes. That's the goal of persuasion, right?
Exactly. Parents, teachers, advertisers, they usually want more than just compliance. They want you to believe it. This involves processes like self-justification.
Self-justification.
It's our powerful drive for consistency. We want our beliefs and actions to align. If they don't, it feels uncomfortable. So sometimes, rather than admit we did something foolish or wrong, we subtly change our beliefs to justify the action after the fact. It makes us feel consistent.
Can you give an example?
The foot in the door technique is a classic. Friedman and Fraser's 1966 study. They asked homeowners to put a huge, ugly, drive carefully billboard on their lawn. Only 17% agreed.
Not surprising.
But another group was first asked, weeks earlier, to display a tiny, harmless 3-inch Be a Safe Driver sign in their window. Nearly all agreed to that small request. Then, when asked about the big billboard later,
They were more likely to say yes.
way more likely, 76% agreed to the huge billboard.
Whoa!
Why? That initial small act of compliance changed their self-perception. They started seeing themselves as the kind of person who cares about public safety. Saying no to the bigger request would then feel inconsistent with this new self-image. So they justified the bigger request to maintain consistency. It's a powerful persuasion tactic, though maybe stronger in individualistic cultures. This drive for consistency is the heart of Leon Festinger's very influential cognitive dissonance theory.
Dissonance, like mental discomfort.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Festinger said, we feel this discomfort, this dissonance, whenever we hold two conflicting cognitions like an attitude and a behavior that don't match, or maybe two contradictory beliefs. And this discomfort motivates us to reduce it, usually by changing the easier thing to change, which is often our attitude. We can't undo the behavior.
Okay, give me the classic study.
The peg-turning study. Festinger and Carl Smith, 1959. Participants did a super boring task turning pegs on a board for an hour. Really dull.
Sounds awful.
It was meant to be. Afterwards, some were paid $1 to tell the next participant who was waiting that the task was actually really fun and interesting. Others were paid $20 to tell the same lie.
$20 back then was decent money. $1, not so much.
Right. The $20 group had a clear external reason for lying. I did it for the money. No conflict, no dissonance. They still thought the task was boring later. But the $1 group...
They lied for practically nothing.
Exactly. So I think the task was boring clashed with, I just told someone it was fun for only $1. That creates dissonance. How to resolve it? They couldn't take back the lie, so they changed their attitude. They later reported actually enjoying the boring task significantly more than the $20 group.
They convinced themselves it was fun to justify the lie.
Precisely. When you induce behavior with minimal pressure or justification, it's more likely to lead to genuine attitude change. We see this with mild punishment too. Kids threatened mildly for playing with a toy later devalue that toy more than kids threatened severely. They justify not playing with it by deciding they didn't like it anyway. We justify effort, like intense fraternity hazing leading to more loyalty, and justify choices, rating our chosen college higher after deciding.
But wasn't there an alternative explanation? Daryl Bem's idea?
Yes, self-perception theory. Bem offered a simpler view. He said, maybe there's no inner turmoil, no dissonance. Maybe we just figure out our attitudes the same way we figure out others' attitudes, by observing behavior and this situation.
Like an external observer looking at ourselves.
Kind of. I just ate 3 slices of pizza. I guess I must have been really hungry. Applied to the PEG study, Bem said we look at our own behavior. I said the task was fun, and I only got $1. Why would I do that unless I actually kind of liked it? Whereas the $20 person thinks, I said it was fun because they paid me a lot. The $1 group, in Bem's view, just makes an attribution about their own behavior. Self-perception also explains the over-justification effect. If you start rewarding kids with pizza for reading, something they might already enjoy.
They might stop reading when the pizza stops.
Exactly. They attribute their reading to the reward, I read to get pizza. The external justification undermines their internal, intrinsic interest. The situational cause gets overestimated.
So, dissonance or self-perception? Which one is right?
The current thinking is probably both in different circumstances. Dissonance might be more likely when our behavior strongly conflicts with a clear, important attitude, causing that felt discomfort. Self-perception might operate more when attitudes are vague or ambiguous. Newer research, even with amnesiacs and monkeys, suggests some behavior-induced attitude change might be pretty automatic, maybe an innate consistency mechanism. The big takeaway, though, is how easily our attitudes can shift to match our actions, often without us even noticing the situational pressures that cause the action in the first place. We become consistent, but maybe not always for the reasons we think. And let's bring this back to Jonestown. The initial reaction was fundamental attribution error. Those people were crazy. But applying self-justification gives a different picture. Jim Jones was a master of the foot-in-the-door technique.
Gradually escalating commitment.
Step by painful step. Small donations first, then more money. Then signing over homes, savings, even custody of children. Each step required justification. Why did I do that? Because the cause is incredibly important. Because Jim Jones is right.
Gene Mills, the defector, described it powerfully how giving up everything forced them into deeper commitment because they had nothing else left but the cause. And those awful white nights, the suicide drills.
Practicing for the end.
Asking members if they were ready to die for the cause. That kind of public declaration justifying potential death would only intensify belief and make the final act seem almost like a logical, even privileged conclusion for the truly committed. It's self-justification on a horrifying scale.
Chilling example. Now, what about influence from groups we admire? How does that shape our inner world?
That brings us to reference groups and identification. Reference groups are the groups we look up to, the ones we use as a benchmark for our own opinions and actions. They provide us with attitudes, beliefs, even a whole way of looking at the world. And ideology.
And identification. That's the process of adopting the norms and beliefs of a reference group because you want to be like them, be associated with them. It's a bridge between just complying and truly internalizing the group's views. We might even feel vicarious dissonance, discomfort, if someone from our reference group acts inconsistently, which can nudge our own attitudes. Theodore Newcomb's Bennington study is the classic long-term example. Back in the 1930s, he studied students at Bennington College, which was quite liberal, but many students came from wealthy, conservative families.
What did he find?
Over their 4 years, the students generally became much more liberal. They increasingly identified with the prestigious liberal faculty and older students. They adopted the community's norms, initially maybe for social reasons, but over time, these liberal views became personally important, internalized.
Did it last?
Remarkably, yes. Follow-up studies 25, even 50 years later, found that Bennington alumni had largely remained liberal. Why? Partly because after college, they tended to choose friends, spouses, and communities that supported their liberal attitudes learned in college. We choose groups that fit us, and those groups reinforce us. It's a cycle. It even happens subtly with language. For bicultural individuals, just switching between, say, Cantonese and English can trigger different cultural mindsets and norms associated with that language. Situational cues again.
Let's widen the focus one last time to how groups themselves operate. Group decisions, institutional roles.
Right. Let's start with institutional norms. These are like the rules of the game for entire organizations, schools, prisons, workplaces. They dictate expected behavior based on your role within that institution, often more powerfully than your individual personality.
And the Stanford prison experiment is the go-to example here, isn't it? Zimbardo's study.
It's one of the most famous, yes. Zimbardo took psychologically healthy male college students and randomly assigned them roles. Prisoner, or guard, in a mock prison set up in a university basement.
And the results were dramatic.
Shockingly so. The experiment, planned for 2 weeks, had to be shut down after only 6 days. The students became their roles with alarming speed. Guards became authoritarian, some even cruel and abusive. Prisoners became passive, helpless, some showing signs of severe distress. It powerfully suggested that the situation, the institutional roles and norms of a prison, could overwhelm individual personalities. Zimbardo later drew direct parallels to the abuses at Abu Ghraib. Now, it's important to note the Stanford study has faced criticism too about methodology, Zimbardo's own role, and whether the guards were implicitly encouraged. A BBC replication called The Experiment in 2002 had different results. Prisoners became more assertive, guards stressed and ineffective. Zimbardo argued the constant filming in the BBC version changed the situation by increasing accountability. It highlights how sensitive these things are to context.
Okay, moving to group decisions. Are two heads really better than one, or do groups make riskier or maybe more cautious choices?
Well, initially, the common wisdom was that groups were more cautious. But James Stoner's 1961 research flipped that. He gave people hypothetical dilemmas, like an engineer deciding on a risky but promising job move. He found groups consistently made riskier decisions than individuals did initially. They called it the risky shift.
So groups are just bolder.
Not exactly.
Ah.
Further research showed it wasn't just about risk. It depends on the group's initial leaning. If the individuals initially leaned towards caution on a particular issue, group discussion made them more cautious. If they leaned risky, they got riskier. So the better term is group polarization.
Group discussion intensifies the initial average opinion.
Pretty much. It pushes the group towards a more extreme version of whatever the initial tendency was. You see it in jury decisions, political attitudes, even how burglars judge a house's difficulty.
Why does that happen?
2 main reasons working together. Informational influence. In discussion, you hear more arguments favoring the dominant viewpoint, reinforcing it. You might hear new reasons you hadn't considered. Normative influence. You want to be seen as a good group member. You compare your view to others and might shift towards the perceived group norm, sometimes even taking a slightly more extreme stance to show you really belong. Both happen, but the informational aspect, the persuasive arguments, often seem stronger.
What about when group decision-making goes badly wrong, like the Bay of Pigs invasion fiasco?
Ah, yes. Arthur Schlesinger Jr., Kennedy's advisor, wrote about his regret, how he kept silent despite his doubts because everyone else seemed so confident. That's a classic symptom of groupthink.
Groupthink, coined by Irving Janis, right?
Exactly. Janis analyzed historical fiascos like the Bay of Pigs, Pearl Harbor, Vietnam War escalation. He proposed groupthink happens when highly cohesive groups prioritize consensus and agreement over critical thinking and realistic appraisal.
What causes it, and what does it look like?
Janis identified contributing factors: high group cohesion, isolation from outside views, lack of systematic procedures, a directive leader who makes their preference known, and high stress or external threats. The symptoms: illusions of invulnerability, we can't fail, unquestioned belief in the group's morality, pressure on dissenters to conform, self-censorship, people biting their tongues, illusions of unanimity, silence taken as agreement, and mind guards, people who shield the group from dissenting information, like Robert Kennedy telling Schlesinger to back off.
Has the theory held up?
It's been hugely influential, but also debated. Lab studies show mixed results. Some reformulations suggest cohesion itself isn't the problem, but cohesion combined with a threat to the group's image can lead to defensive, poor decisions. More recently, the focus has shifted to group norms. A study showed groups explicitly told to prioritize critical thinking made much better decisions than groups told to prioritize consensus, even if they were cohesive.
So the key is fostering the right kind of group culture. How can you minimize groupthink?
Foster those critical thinking norms explicitly. Encourage dissent. Assign a devil's advocate. Use trained facilitators. Break into subgroups. Bring in outside experts. Seek anonymous feedback sometimes. And importantly, create diverse groups. Diversity of background and perspective is a natural antidote to conformity.
Which ties into that mention of affirmative action in the source material, looking at diversity and how we perceive success, topics for another time. What an incredible journey through the power of this situation. We started with these inexplicable acts and found that social psychology offers a lens that goes way beyond just blaming individuals.
It really does. The core theme today has been how profoundly our social environment shapes us, often invisibly. We covered a lot. The fundamental attribution error, how others' presence affects performance, deindividuation, why bystanders don't always help, the pressures of conformity, the chilling reality of obedience to authority, how we justify our actions and internalize beliefs, the influence of groups we identify with, and how groups themselves can make flawed decisions.
And the practical takeaway seems to be just knowing about these forces, social facilitation, pluralistic ignorance, diffusion of responsibility, conformity pressures, obedience triggers, self-justification traps, groupthink symptoms can actually help you recognize them and maybe resist unwanted influence. It gives you back some control.
Absolutely. Awareness is the first step. So here's a final thought for you to ponder. Consider a time in your own life when you felt pressured, maybe subtly, maybe overtly, to do something you didn't really want to do. Thinking back now, with these concepts in mind, conformity, obedience, maybe foot in the door, diffusion of responsibility, which of these subtle situational forces might have been pulling the strings? And how might simply being aware of them change how you'd react next time?
That's a powerful question to reflect on. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the social side of psychology. We really encourage you to start noticing these dynamics playing out in your everyday life. Next time, we'll be exploring social cognition, how we actually perceive, interpret, and make sense of the complex social world around us. We'll see you then.